Good morning. Happy Sabbath. Mercenary or missionaries? This is an interesting topic that came up. I actually talked to the pastor about this topic about 6 months ago. I think it was when we were doing our work bee. We were outside, we were walking around, and I was talking about, I'm business. I've been doing IT and consulting and all this type of work for 20 years, and business, I know business. That was the idea. Mercenary, missionary. There was a concept that actually in the business world comes up when they're talking about how do you classify a good leader? How do you classify a good organization? There are the mercenary organizations. There are the missionary organizations. This concept comes across, and I was like, oh, I know this. I know business. This is the thing. I do the research. I go see what is the ideas. And it's like, okay, mercenary, opportunistic. They want quick results, lust for money. They obsess over the competition. The missionary, strategic partnerships. They realize it's a marathon. They lust for meaning. They obsess about the customer. I've been going through kind of this idea of like, okay, I have my work life, I have my church life, I have my home life. They are all in different compartments. They don't cross over because I'm a professional, I'm a father, I'm an elder, I'm a videographer. Today I'm running all around trying to do all these things, make sure everything is in place, and there are walls between that. There is a wall between my business side, between my other side. Then I realized as over 20 years, I get up in front of people. I've been telling stories. I've been telling all sorts of things, trying to persuade, trying to bring up those, that study, find those little stories, find those little things. And I start finding out, there's no real difference between that and pastoral work. There's a lot more as I started to do more research into this idea. But this is where I am breaking down the walls for myself. I am crossing over from my business world into my other worlds and sharing things that I have studied, things that I have read for this, past 6 months, and putting it on the back burner, bringing it back, putting it on the back burner, bringing it back. So before we get started, let's start off with prayer. Prayer is important. It's important for me and for all of us to listen, to hear, and maybe learn something new. So please bow your heads. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us all here together today. Thank you for technology that connects us. Thank you for the ability for the other churches here in the Teal Plains group and beyond to be able to listen to what is being said, to learn, to maybe think about something from a new light and a new perspective. And please help me to tell the right stories, to touch the right feelings, but also to prepare people to look towards you and what you want for us. And I thank you. In your name, amen. So looking through, all of this, the best thing that comes up is like, well, that might be the business world, but how does that cross over? So let's start off with the missionary. So this is a story of a missionary named Don Richardson, his wife Carol, and their 7-month-old boy. They went to work amongst the Swahi tribe in what was the Dutch New Guinea. And these guys, they were cannibals. They were headhunters. Their meat was a bit different than ours. As the missionary was there and he's trying to help him with understanding, he first tries to understand the language. What is the language that they speak? And then he goes a little further and is like, okay, now let's start talking about the gospel. Let's start talking about what, the story of salvation, the story of Christ, and everything else. And they started to like this story. This was a great story because, you see, they had this concept where you want to fatten up with friendship and then kill the person. They're cannibals. Judas Iscariot is the hero. He is the most awesome person. And the missionary's like, no, this is not what I'm trying to get across. You're not understanding. You're not understanding what I'm saying. And he's praying and he's going through and he's like, what do I do? What do I say? How do I reach them? And at that point he decides, that's it. I'm going to give up. There's no point. I can't get anything across, so I'm going to leave. Well, this actually scared them. They had access to Missionary. They had access to Carol, his wife, who was doing medicine. They had access to tools, because this was a primitive area. They're like, no. We will make peace. We will make peace, and we will bring to you what we call the peace child. This is a child that is of the one tribe that they will hand over to the opposing tribe. And as long as that child lives, there is no war. Aha. Connection. There's something here. There's a, I have to change my perspective. I have to change how I approach, how I communicate. The way you communicate, the way that you try to look for connection is very important. I think maybe we have lost sight of that. The mercenary. The mercenary, it's who I look at in the mirror. It's what you've seen in the pews. It's what you've seen around you. According to a study in 2010 by Rainer Research, 70% of the youth leave the church by the time they're 22. So this was in 2010. The next year, a Barna group estimated that 80% of young people raised in the church will be disengaged by age 29. So going through all this study, this is across multiple churches and organizations, there's a problem. We're losing people. They're going elsewhere. They're not interested. They're not engaged. What's the problem? How do we solve this? So they put together another study because they want to know more. And so their study was a nationwide study where they're trying to find out on a graph or try to look at what is, how Christ-like is your church? How Christ-like is your organization? So they went through and they prepared a 20 questionnaire, and there's a point system on it. And they divided it up into 4 different types of questions. What are actions like Christ? What are attitudes like Christ? And then on the flip side, what are self-righteous actions? And what is self-righteous attitudes? So, for example, an action to be like Christ. I listen to others to learn their story before telling them about my faith. Contrast to a self-righteous action. I tell others the most important thing in my life is following God's rules. I have influenced multiple people to consider following Christ. Now, I don't talk about sins or struggles. That's between me and my God. You don't know what's going on in my life. I regularly choose to have meals with people of a different faith, different morals, different background from me. No. I will, if you're gay, if you're lesbian, if you're Democrat, no, I will not eat with them. My table is my table. I only eat with who I eat with. I try to discover the needs of non-Christians rather than waiting for them to come to me. No, 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 no. I like to go and point out to people, do you have the right theology? Are you following the right God? Are you following it in the right way? Actions. Actions speak louder than words. Attitudes. How do you think? I believe God is for everyone. On the flip side, that's not my responsibility. I don't need to talk to people. God will touch them. I feel compassion for people who are not following God and are doing immoral things. No, 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 no. People who follow God's rules are better than those who do not. So this was a questionnaire they sent out to many, many Christians. And I know it might be a little hard to read, but as you start to see on the statistics and the results that came back, there is some very interesting pieces of data. The churches that in the research that are Christ-like in attitude and Christ-like in actions is in the upper right-hand corner, and it's a very small quadrant. There's a lot that's over in the quadrant of we have both Pharisaical, I'm not good with these words, attitudes and actions. They lean very far over, and they're all divided up by multiple churches, evangelical, non-evangelical, Catholics, and you can see, this is not where we want to be. What is this organization? And then as they start looking into a little bit deeper of the data, they start seeing of the populations, the groups that are statistically less likely to have both Christ-like actions and attitudes are elders, 67 and older at 6%, Hispanics at 6%, Christians with a conservative ideological viewpoint at 8%, and men at 9%. So what is this all saying? I mean, there was a statement that came up that said, the question of authentic faith is a particularly sore topic for many millennials. They are leaving the church in a large part due to the hypocrisy that they experience. Again, this research, it's no perfect measure, but the study points out a possibility that the perception of so many young people and that, you look around, there's a kernel of truth to this. There's something here. There's something here. So I'm going to now start looking at something that's actually biblical. There's a biblical mystery. And we're going to start looking at a section in Ephesians. So I'll have it on the screen as well, but we'll start looking at Ephesians 2. Ephesians 2:3, 2-3. Surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace that was given for me, that is, the mystery made known to me by revelation, as I have written briefly. In reading this, then you will be able to understand my insight into the mystery of Christ, which was not made known to people in other generations, and it has now been revealed by the Spirit of God's holy apostles and prophets. So Ephesians, the time of Paul, it's time for this great mystery, this great reveal. It's always in that story of you're all waiting. What is this mystery? What is this story? This is very important. And then it says, the mystery is that through the gospel, the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel, members together of one body, and sharers together in the promise in Christ Jesus. So let's ponder for a moment. The mystery was coming together. The mystery was members of one body. The mystery was a church. Really? A church? Because, church today has become predictable. You go to a building, someone gives you a bulletin, you sit in a chair, you sing a few songs, a guy delivers a message, maybe it's polished, maybe not. Someone sings a solo, you go home. Really, is Is that all God was saying here through Paul to the Ephesians? Is that all God intended for us? What would the church look like today if we really stopped taking control of it and letting the Holy Spirit lead? You know, the pandemic has been going on. There's always been this whole conversation. The church is not the building. You know, heard it already. We've been through that. We've been going through that whole mindset. The church is not the building. We keep on saying that, but we're not actually going to the other side. Okay, if it's not the building, then what is it? So the actual Greek word for church, ecclesia, and of course, you know, Pastor Michael can correct my pronunciation. I'm not Greek, didn't take Greek, but I like to look up definitions because the definition words matter. I'm a programmer. What you say matters. You must be precise. My family knows that I must be precise. I'm always very particular with the words that I say, and I try not to correct incorrect usage of words, but this is who I am. So I looked up ecclesia, the definition: a gathering of citizens called out from their homes into some public place, and assembly, those who anywhere in a city, village, constitute such a company and are united into one body. That is the church. The church is not this building. It is not all the worries that we put into it. It's not keeping up the grounds. It's not the board meetings of worrying about mortgages and is the furnace broken and all the rest of this. The church is us. It is community. If you start looking at our bulletin, what I find awesome where we have arrived, if you look at how many different days there are small groups that are meeting, that is the church. The church is when we get together as a group. The church is when we're having our fellowship meal. The church is when we're at Operation Hunger and we're ministering to people. We're gathered together. We are doing. We're not sitting in this Eurocentric, this building on top of the hill that you all go to and you tune in for 2 hours and then tune out. In Acts, the early church. And when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch, so that it was for the whole year they assembled with the church and taught a great many people. And the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. They assembled with the church, with a group, with an organization. There was no building. They were gathering wherever they were at. This was the early church. And also, Paul was also talking about, for I am the least of the apostles, who am not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. He wasn't going out there beating a building. He was persecuting the church. He was persecuting people, groups. Church is people, not the building, not the original design. So Pastor just finished up the whole sanctuary series, going through all of these, all the symbolisms, all here in Israel. There was the tent, there was all the symbolism of each and every one of the pieces, but there was also one of the key verses. Then I will make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. What's one of the things that you see about the temple, that whole idea? Was it permanent? It was mobile. It was something that always moved. The church always moved. The church was never in one place because the church was the people. The people moved. God moves with us. God is with us, the church, the groups where we're at. Then later, there came that time of they were still moving the church. And then David comes along. He's like, I want to change that. And so Nathan, as we're going to read here, Nathan received a conversation from God, and he says, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. You are not the one to build me a house to dwell in. I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought up Israel up out of Egypt to this day. I have moved from one tent site to another, from one dwelling place to another. Wherever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of their leaders whom I commanded to shepherd my people, 'Hey, why have you not built me a house of cedar?'" This concept goes back. It goes back even to that time. Did God really want a building? Is that really the original model? He goes on to say, "I declare to you that the Lord will build a house for you when your days are over, and you will go to be with your ancestors. I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He will be the one who will build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever." One of the nice things about reading the Bible and going through some of these different ideas is you start finding out these guys are no different than me. They hear something, they think something, but that's not right. That's not really what he meant. David sat back and said, "Oh, okay, this is great." And then he has his sons. There was the whole story of Absalom. He has his son Solomon. Oh, this is the guy. He is the one who's going to build the temple. He's the one that's going to go and do this. But that was wrong. That wasn't the temple. Israel wasn't, they were listening, but they were not hearing, which is not much different than today. As he says, goes into it further, "I will be his father, he will be my son. I will never take my love away from him as I took it away from your predecessor. I will set him over my house and my kingdom forever. His throne will be established forever." You flash forward to the New Testament, we're still keeping with that term, that word temple. Don't you know that you yourself are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? This pattern, this thing has been repeated. This idea that the temple, that the church, the thing that they were looking forward, that was us together, us communicating, us learning, us going through and trying to find out about, what is the struggles of your life? What are the things you're really going through? Where can we help? Where can we just listen? Listen and not judge. So what happened? If we look at what happened, you start seeing throughout history, throughout the Bible, and through even now, we go in cycles. One of the cycles is that early church believed in a pacifist ideal. And then later, it started to bring in the militaristic, the mercenary view. John Horsch, a Mennonite historian, to say that war is consistent with Christian principles means that the Christian church is one of the first 3 centuries, that the church of the first 3 centuries misunderstood Christ's teaching. It's an established historical fact that the early church did not permit participation in war. The Dark Ages, they were dark. They were dark because you were trying to withhold information. Oh, you can't read the Bible, you can't study, you can't go find out the mystery. You can't find out that, you need to be together as groups. And, groups is where it's the power. So how do you disrupt that? You need to disrupt the early church. The disruption of the early church, you look at Nero, we'll just kill the Christians, that's the way. Nope, that didn't work. Martyrdom. You started to have even more people, even more believers, even more people turning to religion, Christ. These guys, they have something important. Let's follow that. No, That didn't work. How else can we attack them? Oh, you know how else we could attack them? Why don't we just, move them all towards a building? Why don't we lock up the Bible and make sure that no one else can read it? And why don't we put people in front that will tell them what to think, tell them what to do? We start bringing in the mercenary, the militaristic view, the dogma, the believe this or else. We have the Crusades. We're going out, we're going to, in the name of God, we're going to go and kill because they're non-believers. And then we come back from that, the Reformation. We start coming back from these ideas. We start going through, okay, that's not the right way. But then in philosophy, there's people still arguing about the just war theory. 9/11 brought this back. It brought it to the forefront. War, military, yes, we can still do that because if it's a righteous war. These are hard topics that don't get talked about. I also find it interesting, as a side note, as we look at Paul. What did Paul do as a profession after he was converted? He was a tent maker. Yes, he was a tent maker. He was self-sufficient. What's one of the things that the early church tried to change at the time of Constantine? Oh, no. You don't need to do civil work. You'll be paid by the state. The state will pay for the clergy. The state will pay for telling people what to think. Flash forward to America, the forefathers were looking at that model like, no, we need separation of church and state. But a lot of those ideas haven't really broken apart. We're still stuck with some of these ideas, this idea of dogma. Okay, so now we decide we're not going to go out and attack with swords. We're not going to attack with bullets if you don't believe, but we will attack in the foyer. We will attack those that walk in, and you have that little tick, that look like, oh, what are they wearing? Oh, that's not right. How many times, I can look at my own past 20 years of being the quote-unquote an adult. How many times have I left the church, left the building, left the organization because, was it God? Back at those statistics, there is a huge percentage of millennials that still believe in God. They just don't believe in the people. And I can relate. Being a young child, going to that church, listening to that awesome sermon, the guy that could tell the great story that it was involved. I'm a teenager and I'm like, that's it. I want that. I want to be there. I'm going to go all in. I'm going to join this group. I'm going to join the Pathfinders. I'm going to join all this. I'm going to go there. And then you have the pastor's kids. You have the other kids. They're then looking at you and like, how are you here? Shouldn't you be out in the fields? It's strawberry picking time. What are you doing? The anger, the hurt as a teenager. There's many more stories. They're not mine, and some are mine that I have told, some that I won't tell. There is the hurts when you go into that building and they look at you and they're like, And just those little terms that turn people away. They won't return. Eventually, something brings them back. Is it, oh, I have a family, I have now kids, I need to teach them the right way. Maybe that works for my age group, but my age group, There's another age group coming along that they're getting married later. Why? Because they've seen the hypocritical ways of family, the hypocritical ways of church, of organizations, of why should I care? Why should I be involved? And let's go back. This whole idea is not new. It's actually repeated. If we start looking back at the nature and purpose of Israel, like we were just looking at, if we go back to that temple, what was one of the things that was said? Have the people of Israel build me a holy sanctuary so that I can live among them. The model that Jesus wants is for us to live amongst each other and to be able to demonstrate God. Israel missed the mark. You can look at their history. They didn't understand what they were doing. They didn't understand, exactly. This is what led to, when I was going through doing my studies, my research, what led to like the verse, today's verse. Luke 4:18 through 19. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. You hear this, you start hearing a term, what was that, Frosty and the Snowman? What was that island? The island of misfit toys? These themes, these things that we read, this popular culture, the things that's pulling people away, they're ancient. They've been around, these stories. But everyone else is doing it better than this church. Everyone else knows how to reach out. They know how to preach to the poor. They know how to heal, how to go in and talk to the brokenhearted. I mean, as I went from a teenager into my college years, when I start learning, I had a better conversation with that tattooed, multiple earring person that had a better heart and a better peace, a better sense of caring for me than I did at church. Why do you think the youth leaves? And you go further, contrasting back to Israel. But I tell you truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout the land. But none of them was Elijah sent except to Zarephath in the region of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. Patriarchy? No, he didn't go to the male, he didn't go to the family, he went to the broken home. There were many lepers in Israel at the time of Elisha the prophet. None of them were cleansed except Naaman the Syrian, the foreigner. He was been trying to teach Israel that you're supposed to be the light, you're supposed to go and teach, be open to the nations around you, but they weren't. And so later, as we start reading, as we just read, the great mystery that was revealed. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. The plan has been there. The correct plan has been there all along. But we just haven't looked at it. We haven't looked at it from that perspective. That's why I do enjoy looking at the Bible of some days I'm the missionary, some days I'm the mercenary. I'm human. I make mistakes. I remember looking at the ones of, I was probably about 6, and I was like, being in the strict Adventist background, "You're eating meat! How dare you! You can't do that! Don't you know? Blah, 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 blah." And we're just kids, and a little kid looks over and is like, "What about the stories of the loaves and fishes? Jesus ate fish." What? What? There's many other times when I'm like, "Don't you know? Don't you know?" And then someone says, "Wait, don't you just see?" Oh, no. What? Oh, oops. Mistakes. Mistakes were made. But as I go through all this, I'm leading a story. I'm leading this narrative based upon study, going through all this. Here's what I've looked at, here's patterns, here's history, because that's a very European way of looking at church and mission and everything else. You have a premise, and we're also taught this in like high school and in college. You have a premise, you have an idea, you must find your supporting evidence, you must argue, you must have conclusion. There is a well-structured, this is the way of a sermon, this is the way of a talk, this is a way of a, X, Y, Z. The thing is that inside one of those areas is Jesus, who throughout his ministry was teaching parables. In a parable, he covers so much more ground than all of this research. This was the ancient technique of teaching. So we're going to go look at Luke 10. Luke 10, 25 to 26. "And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, 'Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?' He said to him, 'What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?'" Inherit. What do you need to do to inherit? Haven't we already studied? It's a gift. Oh, this is a debate. This is intellectual discourse. This is a lawyer coming up. So, if we look at the law on the left and on the right, this is an argument. This is a trap. And so Jesus was like, okay, let's engage. So he answered and he said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength, and with your mind, all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Oh, debate, okay. You're bringing together Leviticus, Deuteronomy, two entirely different thoughts. Good. Bringing together an argument. Okay. But this game is just getting started. There is the mandate for him, this whole neighbor, you look at it, love, perfect love. There are some concepts here of like perfect love. Do we have perfect love? Can we perfectly go out and say, "I don't care who you are, what you're doing, and I can put my arms around you, and I can hug you, and I can say, 'Welcome. I am glad, I am happy that you're here'"? I've not been able to do this. I don't have perfect love. I don't think I'm able to do it. I have too much human in me. And so he's still getting into this argument. And he said to him, "You have answered rightly. Do this and you will live." But he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" So I know, we've gone through this story. You've heard it as a kid. You've heard it for years, the whole Good Samaritan story. But there is deeper meanings. There's deeper layers here. How many times have we just gotten in this debate with God, with our life? We want to justify ourselves. And we're like, okay, yeah. I see how that's going. But here, did you think of? And so let's continue. Let's see where else is going. Then Jesus answered and said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. So up in Delaware last week, when I was talking with Becky, I found out that she went to Southern archaeology. So I'm sorry I don't have a photo, because I asked her, I was like, when you were there, do you have any pictures of Jericho? And she said, well, the walls fell down. There really wasn't much there. The archaeological did. So I was like, okay. So I wanted to have an image here, but I didn't. So I started looking further into this whole concept. There's this term, a certain man went down from Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was that city on the hill. It was the place of, it was a center of religious, ceremonial, social. Everything was around there. So it was like the high point. Everything else was downhill from there. So Jericho, there was this whole strip, this area where you get to be, you got to be very careful, very quickly try to get through that area, because you could be robbed. Someone could come, and it was also told, you must give them whatever they say. Don't fight. Just whatever, if they say they want, your wallet, your clothes, your whatever, sure, just give it to them. Don't fight, because they're liable to kill you. So if you look at this guy put up resistance. He was like, no, I'm not going to do this. And so what did they do? They fell upon him. They stripped him of his clothing. They wounded him. They departed, leaving him half dead. This was the best that I could do in the short time of trying to get a picture of Jericho to Jerusalem. Not exactly to scale or anything else, but it was that idea of, we're going to come back to here, just kind of some geography. It wasn't necessarily that far, Jerusalem to Jericho. And just for context, Samaria, because Samaria, we're going to come back to that concept. Now, by chance, a certain priest came down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. This is just such a few small bit of words, and I know when we always look at the story, it's always like, okay, yeah, there was this, and there was a person, yeah, I'm that person, and this is what the story means, I'm that person, salvation, blah, blah, blah. We get it, we understand it. That's our context. That's not the context that they had. Because you see, a priest was had a very high status. The priest had an inherited job. Oh yes, my family has been in the priesthood because of my bloodline back to. And on top of that, there was several priests, several families. The families were large. So in order to do their priestly ceremonial duties, they did not actually have to serve in the temple. They didn't actually have to serve in all of that. Through the casting of lots, oh, okay, this is my high honor. I get to go do this job this year, and I get to work 2 weeks out of the year. Wouldn't that be nice? You can only work 2 weeks out of the year. Maybe this might not be your year. So what do you do for the rest of that time? Business, all types of other types of things. So the priest was a wealth class. They had money. He had an animal. That's the whole reason why in the story there's a priest that's first. Because in the story, from their perspective, they know this story. They know this concept. Oh, okay. Oh, I know where this is going, because this was that intellectual debate. Okay, I know where it's going. We're going to have a priest We're going to have the Levite, we're going to have the layman that goes with them. They're all part of all this. This is the high point. The Levite, they're not as high in the hierarchy. They don't get as much of all of that, but they still, the Levites, they still have, they're more of the working class of priest. It's lower level by working. They were the ones that would be transporting, back when we looked at the whole tabernacle. They were the ones that would pack it up. They were the ones that would heft it. And they also were no slouches. The Levites, if you look back at their history, they were the warrior class. They were not just, they weren't just the pastor in the suit. They were strong. But they weren't as wealthy. So they're still back there. The priest is coming along. He has his animal. So they already see the picture. We know where this is going. Okay, I see it. Certain priest. The priest is coming along. Oh, look, here's the next part. Likewise, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. So we have these two small verses. But there's more to unpack here. So they both passed by on the other side. First one, then the other. So what's the first one? So the priest, as he's coming along, and he looks over, and he sees this guy, on the side of the road. But remember, he was stripped of his clothes. He's naked. How do you identify a Jew? It's usually by their dress, by the way that they talk, by, there's certain things that recognizes, oh yeah, this is a Jewish man. So I'm obligated, I must stop because he's a Jew, and he was robbed. I must, but the ceremonial law, I can't really touch him if he's dead, because then I have to go through a purification ritual. To go back to Jerusalem, I have to get all these other people involved. Everyone else is going to see this. I've already been out on the road for this, 2 to 3 weeks. There's only the time that I have to do throughout the year, and I need to get home. I don't have time for this. And what's worse, what if I touch him and I help him, and this is all great? But what if he then dies? Well, I still have to go back to Jerusalem. I still have to go through the purification ceremony. I still have to go through all this. So, going through all this, he's alive, he's dead. No, I don't have time for this. I'm going to walk on. How many times did we say that? Oh, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to look. I don't have time to communicate with that person. I don't have time. He walks on. The Levite comes along, and he's now looking at that? Oh, there's a body here. I can't tell. Is he alive or is he dead? So it's not quite as stringent, but he still would have to deal with the ceremonial, the cleansing, the purification ritual, and all the rest of that. And he still is going through the same mental checklist. Well, if this, but the priest went here first, so it's a priest's call. I'm not going to show up the priest because this would look bad. I'm a lower station. I'm not going to do something that might look this. We live in the same town. We live in the same town, and it's kind of close. So we're not going to. We're not going to do that. Because, he can't have them, no, not going to do it. And then the curveball. Everyone is waiting for the layman. The layman is the next person who's supposed to come along. They're like, okay, intellectual discourse, here we go. And then the curveball. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and we saw him. He had compassion. So he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. So as we look at this, we're like, oh, okay, here's the hero of the story. For us, we look at it and we move on. Okay, look at this. There's the other person. But again, look at it from their context. Their context is like, oh, a Samaritan? So their hatred of the Samaritans was deep. You know, when you have the Hatfield and the McCoys, you know, the whole hatred between two opposing views. You know, the Samaritans, they had their own belief system. They only believed in the first 5 books of the Bible. They only believed, you know, in their own philosophies, and we don't mix. And then when the wars were, they were, you know, it's like you hear about it now, but it's like you hear about the anger would be that the purification, the whole purification concept. The Samaritans were angry at the Israelites, and so just before Passover, they went and they dug up all these bones, and they go and they threw it throughout the temple, and how could you do that? There's all these purification rituals we do. Oh, we hate them, we'll get you. The back and forth, the continual hatred was really, really deep. And for them to not hear this, a Samaritan came by, and then he had compassion. Compassion, and looking deeper into the words that were here, he had compassion. It moved him. It moved him that there was a person that was hurt. And you know what? Through all this whole thing, all along, every one of these people could have found out whether he was a Jew or not. But think about that. That's a little sensitive. This guy is naked. The only way that you can tell is, no. Was he circumcised or uncircumcised? I'm not going to get that close. There is so much more here. But the Samaritan sees, he doesn't care. He isn't going to go into the laws of do this, do that. He had compassion. When he journeyed, it also says he has an animal. He was not a poor man. He was another wealthy class. He was the same as the priest. He had his own animal. He had his own wine. He had his own oil. They would travel. They had their own first aid kit. He had his own first aid kit that he was able to bring out and then deal with this. He traveled prepared. He set him on his own animal and then brought him to an inn. I didn't have a chance to ask Becky, but one of the things that I was starting to do the research of, you do not find an inn that's outside a city. So the inn had to be inside Jericho. He is the Samaritan. He is hated. He had to go in, not just with a body, but he had to go into Jericho. He had to bring this body with everyone else who's looking at him. There's a body that you're bringing in? How do we know you're not the one who beat him up? This was a risk. This was not just an easy, oh, hey, there's a guy, I have compassion. There's deeper meaning to this. He had to take a life risk in order to help. But he was moved because this is a human. This is not a Jew. This is not a Samaritan. This is another human being. And he brought him to the inn to take care of him. He still had to worry about, when I leave the next day, I could be jumped on the way in, I could be jumped on the way out. You know how bad this whole hatred goes. And then when it goes, the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii and he gave them to the innkeeper and he said, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. when I come again. I know when I first read that, I was like, oh, okay, this is the salvation story. You start hearing these terms, but then you also look at it as like, there's more deeper meaning here as well. See, the guy was brought in, what was his state of dress? He was naked. There's no wallet. There's no money. The innkeeper, to keep him and to put out his own money for a room and bandage and clothes, at the end of it, he could legally sell him into slavery in order to get all the money back. The innkeeper had no reason to do any of this out of the kindness of his heart. The Samaritan gave the denarii to the innkeeper. Whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. So not only is the Samaritan going to risk his life that day, he's going to risk his life again by coming back at some other point and saying that he's going to come in and pay his price, whatever it is. This was a curveball. This was a really big curveball. This is not what they had signed up for. This is, they're all back there thinking Samaritan. And then when it finally comes back to Jesus asking the question, which of these three do you think was the neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And when you hate someone so much that you can't even say their name, you can't even say anything about them, that he just talks about them in the third person, where the lawyer says, he who showed mercy on him. And then Jesus said, go and do likewise. He who showed mercy on him. He didn't say the Samaritan, anything to describe him of no, I concede. You won, I lost this argument. But the angers are still there. Jesus, on purpose, was ticking off the audience. How many times would we do something like that now? Of that's a Republican, that's a Democrat, that's a insert whatever. We have hatreds now. The story is still speaking to us now. It's a pretty deep story as you start going further into it, as with are the rest of the parables. Jesus has been foreshadowing his own story. It's been a passion play throughout this whole thing. But that lawyer, he was so very angry. So mercenary, missionary. Which was it? You look at, you're looking at Facebook, you're looking at Twitter, you're looking at all these people, and they're like, blah, 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 blah. Atheists, I hope you all die. Blah, 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 blah. I hope you all die. Oh, that's a Christian. Oh, that's an argument. Oh, the things that you see on Facebook, the hatred. Oh, from churches, church members. Oh. We just need to stop and think. We're the children of God. Our home is not here. We can be responsible citizens. We can vote. We can pay our taxes. But, maybe there's a time when we just need to be quiet. So there was a story that, as I was reading, it was this guy named Mr. Bezek, or let's just call him Mr. B. Remind me of someone. He was a foster parent, and he was a father of 2 sons. His one son had this brittle bone disease, so just playing, his bones would break, as a child. So he couldn't run, he couldn't do all these other things because the bones might break. And their other son passed away before he even reached puberty. So he was having to go to the hospital because of his son, the brittle bone disease with him and his wife. And, at the hospital, he kept on noticing there's these kids here that they're here, but they don't seem to have anyone. They don't have anyone with them. There's no parent, there's no grandparent. There's not even, necessarily the social worker. They're just there, and, maybe it's someone who dropped them off. And he starts asking, he's like, where are these kids that are here? Because they're in that wing. It's like, well, they're children that, they have no parents. They were in jail. They died, drug OD. They're who knows where. And they're the kids that were terminally ill. Nobody wants them. Nobody wants to deal with that. Let the state deal with that. And when he's there dealing with his own son, and he's like, they had to bury their own son. It's like, these kids, there's no one to hold them. There's no one to let them know that it's okay. His heart was broken. And he was like, can I help? Can I hold them? And they're like, okay, but because of the medical things, you need to have training. Okay, I'll do that. I'll do the training. Can I take them home? You need to be a foster parent. Okay, I'll go through. I'll do it all. He became a foster parent. He came through, and because he kept on saying, it's like, there's no one there that will hold these kids. They need to know love before they die. They were already abandoned by their family. They were already abandoned. So in 1995, he went through the process. He became eligible. He went into all this extra work so he could do the extra medical care. But he was only going to do it for the terminally ill. I'll take them. I'll hold them. At the time that I was reading the story, he had this daughter that she was blind, couldn't see, and couldn't hear, and had this brain disorder. But the only way that he was communicating is through touch, through feeling, through knowing that someone was there, someone was holding you. As I read further in the story, he had to bury 10 children. He has been doing this since 95. He would devote all of his time to this. He might have a social worker, he might have someone who would come in. His wife still stayed at work to help fund this. They wasn't getting much money from this. He would still have the others that would be coming in, and a social worker that will allow him to get some time away, a couple hours, do some errands, maybe up to 4 hours a week. But he was there. He was holding them. He gave himself to that ministry. He said, no child should ever die feeling unloved. No child should ever die alone. He was the Good Samaritan. He was the missionary. By the way, the guy's full name is Mohammed Bazik. He's Muslim. Does that change the story at all? Should that change the story at all? We have a tendency to have preconceived notions in our head of who walks through the door, of who we communicate with. Mercenary, missionary. We have been told, be the neighbor, be the church. Please bow your heads. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for your love and guidance. Thank you for your stories and for being able to teach and show us the way that we are supposed to live, the way to embrace others, the way to know that the church is everywhere. It is not this building. It is all the things we do each week. It's where we gather together. It's where we're under attack. It's where things happen during the week and we can't get together. We are under attack. The devil doesn't want us, because in strength, when we can help each other, strengthen each other, that is where we get power. That is where we learn and we grow and we become the church that you want us to be. And I thank you for all of this. In your name, amen.